They are too weak to take care of their own families, and we just don't want those type of people in our country.
So you don't want me in your country?
Not if you're an asshole person, no. And if you come
Oh,
in, I want you to come in the right way, but not as an asshole person. I want you to come in and see there? Now you got the disease. What's wrong with you?
Now you got the disease.
you are so very disrespectful, man.
What do you mean?
You are so very disrespectful.
In what way?
By calling us asshole people.
No, the asshole country.
It's not the truth.
But it's not the country that made. It's
but
not.
That's okay though.
But let me ask you, E-Money. Your real name is E-Money?
Hey, let me ask you,
Yes.
E-Money.
Oh, let me ask. It's not the country that make the country asshole. It's the people who make the country by not taking care of it. And you and I know that people of color do not take care of things. And I don't want that in my country.
That's not true though, man. You're very disrespectful towards black people.
How about being disrespectful?
Because you be insulting them.
What do I
Instead of
say?
coming to us and telling that okay that there's certain things we need to do and things like that.
He said
But
saying
you're
there's things we
insulting
need
us,
to do.
and that's
That's
not right.
disrespectful.
Something like 77.3, and I wrote about it in my new article. Black babies are born out of wedlock. Is that immoral?
By black people being in the United States, black people is a very small minority to the white man. So of course it's going to look bad because there's a small bunch of people.
So if black people were majority in the United States, are you saying that there would be a lower percentage of black babies?
Yes, it would.
And so why are they out of control in Mommy Africa? Mostly blacks there, they do the same thing over there too.
Well, I don't know about Africa. I mean, I have.
I rest my case.
Just do your math.
Right.
You know math, right?
Of course, a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm black, but let me ask you this.
What do you mean? Don't disrespect yourself like that, man.
Respect yourself. Ba la 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 la.
Hey,
If
I
you
want to ask you
don't
another
give a
question.
hoot
You
about
said you would not.
yourself.
I'll ask you another question. What do you? why
Wait,
do you
you're
never
not.
talk
All you're
about
doing is
these
asking questions. You sound like my mama.
Right.
Because, okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
Last
Okay,
question. I gotta run.
I also heard you said something about you would not hire black people with black sounding names.
No, I would not.
Before, right?
Right.
What about my name? My name. Would you hire me at your job?
Never.
Never.
What's wrong with my name?
There ain't no real name.
Yes.
I ain't gonna hire
yes,
somebody named E-Money. What the hell?
So you discovered.
Go back and tell your daddy. Go back. Tell your daddy give you a real name. E-Money is not a name.
So you telling me you discriminate, would turn down a person just because of their name? Doesn't matter what their background is, or they're good.
I don't care if they got degrees up the yang yang, and if they work like a slave. If his name is E-Money, I ain't gonna hire him.
You better stop talking down on black people, Jesse. That's not right.
I'm
You're
telling
gonna
the
need
truth.
black people one day.
What?
You're gonna need black people. You're gonna need black people one day.
If ever I needed you, Lord, I need you now.
And then you do Colin Kaepernick so wrong. I be listening to you. You be belittling him.
And he's dating an older woman. Did you know that?
I heard that.
Would a real man date an older woman?
Well, if you feel like, not.
Would a real man date an older woman? Is the question.
Yeah.
I rest my case. You're a beta. Beta male.
I don't believe in that beta alpha male.
But you are beta. You're not an alpha. That's why you don't believe in it.
Right.
Oh, trust me, I'm real alpha.
No, you're not an
I'm
alpha
real
male. Everything you just said is against what's right. Alpha males are for what's right. They're an example, they have faith, and they live it. You're not for what's right. Everything you just said is all wrong. Beta! Call me again, E-Money. I gotta run. I can't play with him any longer. Keith is a first-time caller out of Texas. Keith, thank you for calling and thanks for holding. You're on the air.
I wanted to piggyback on an earlier caller. You had stated that most black people, I guess hate white people.
Yes. They blame white people for their failure. Always hear them crying this false illusion of racism. You even hear black men blaming white people because they have failed at creating economic for themselves. They have not built businesses, they don't have money, and they blame that on the white man. It's not normal for men to be crying like little girls about what some white man is doing to them.
Right.
And that's because they hate them. That's why they blame them. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, it makes sense to you, listening to you, but there's
So
no logic in it.
you think it's normal for grown adult men to spend a
Well,
lifetime
you're leading my answer.
to spend a lifetime blaming the white man? Is that normal?
Yes, but
See, that's not normal. That's not normal, but you think that it is because
you're directing the question. That's not where I want to go.
You're in a fallen state. You're in a fallen state. You think that's normal.
Can't do anything. What the hell?
Sir, let me explain this to you. I'm black.
And
Majority of the black people I know, the reason that they think the way about white people is the history that we've been through. On the flip side,
what history
more
have
white
you gone
people-
through?
Hey,
History have you gone through?
oh, you name it. Coding, being stopped unrationally by the police, stopping slurs, you name it.
You've gone through all that?
I have, personally. I'm 60 years old.
Are
Yes,
you a criminal?
How did you derive at me being a criminal? Have you arrived at me being a criminal from our conversation?
Because
you are doing what white people do.
what's that?
You know, for you to ask me, are you a criminal?
Right, I did ask you that.
It has nothing to do with how black people are doing. It has something to do with how the police are doing. But let me show you something
That's
else.
not true at
Okay,
all.
in the last 5 years, Jesse, let me ask you one question.
Chief,
Please.
that's
You
not
got the show
true
all
at
day.
all.
Man, I only have 2 minutes. Can I please have a minute?
But you
Can I have a second?
wait, I can't let you make statements that are not true and just run away from it.
You have to be mad dog out of your mind to be living in America and believe what you just stated. I don't control the news. You know, you do have a little show there. So, I mean,
I
if
don't have
had
a little show. I have a major show.
Well, you the one should. Well, why don't you put it on the show so we can hear about it?
Well, we are.
Man, if there wasn't no racism in the world, that would be no need for Al Sharpton. Like, do you agree?
No, I don't agree. The reason Al
They can make
Sharpton...
Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and every other race baiter, as you all call to be in existence, just quit being racist.
Keith,
That's just like your president. I guarantee you, you don't believe the president is racist, right?
you love white people?
Of everybody, correct?
Do you love white people?
If there are people, I say I love everybody. Now, if you want to implement it,
Do you love white?
Being a human being, I love everybody.
Do you love white people?
Man, that's a no-brainer. I said everybody.
No,
So,
I didn't
mean,
ask
they are
about. I
inclusive.
did not ask about everybody. I only ask about white people. Do you love white people?
You just want a yes? Okay, yes. How about yes?
Do you love white people?
Say yes, Jesse. Come on.
But you lying. You
I
don't.
said yes. You thought
Look
you
how
couldn't.
long it took you to say yes.
You might want to go back to psychological school or whatever school that you get.
You
this
do not
data
love
from.
white people. You
That's
hate white.
inaccurate.
You hate white people. You blame them for
Yeah,
your
I'm gonna
failure.
do something I normally do. That's a damn lie. I just told you that I love white people.
You blame
Do
them
you
for
love
your
black people?
failure.
Wait a minute. Do you love black people?
I
you
do.
love black people?
Yes.
see how easy
So
that
where you
was?
get off on this? Because
rest
if you
my
really
case.
look
Right,
at
see
it,
how easy that
Let me
was?
ask you: are you
Okay,
a
look.
Christian?
a Christian.
Are you a Christian?
Does that matter?
Are you a Christian?
Whatever a Christian is, what is a Christian?
Are you a
Define it for me.
Christian?
Define it for me, Jesse.
No, just answer the question. You know if you're one or
Well, I don't know
not.
what a Christian is. I don't know what a Christian is, so then you won't define it.
So
So, I mean,
does
you're
that
asking a
mean
question,
that?
I don't know what it is.
So does that mean you're not a Christian?
I'm asking you to define what it is, sir, and you won't define it. So I
How
don't know
old
what
are you?
I don't know. 60 years old.
Well, you're
60.
the one that needs to go back to school. You don't know what a Christian is.
Now, that's your problem. Hell, the Christian that you learn in school, hell, you ain't no Christian. You think you are. I mean, you shouldn't be. If you are, you shouldn't be.
I am a Christian. It is a blessing to be a Christian.
A blessing.
Yes.
makes you a Christian, Jesse? What makes you a Christian?
My belief in God.
Your belief.
God is my Father. If you're not a Christian and you hate white people, I gotta run. Bye. Amazing. In a moment. Ding dong, ding dong. What are the steps to believing in Jesus?
Now, some people are thinking that maybe this is a hard question or maybe it's a tough one to answer, but it's really simple. To know Jesus is to believe in God.
And so, what are the steps to believing in Jesus?
It's really simple. I mean, it's not really that hard.
And what are the steps to believing in Jesus?
Well, me personally, I go to church.
Why did he
I fellowship.
there?
I read my Bible.
What are the steps to believing in Jesus?
That's a tougher question than it sounds for some reason.
Nick, hold on. Let me take a break. Smoke on it.
All right. All right.
And hold on. I'll take a break and come. I'll come back to you, buddy.
Yes,
All
sir.
right, back in a moment. Nick from Florida. What are the steps to believing in Jesus?
Jesus was a Jew, so we don't have to be.
What are the steps to believing in Jesus?
Being a son of God, fellowshipping with other Christians and same believers, going to church.
What are the steps to believing in Jesus?
I don't know.
How old are you, Nick?
I'm 38 years old, and I feel like I've been lost this whole time.
It's amazing. And so just be still. God will reveal it to you, all right?
Yes, sir.
Do the silent prayer, and you'll see. Just be patient. All right, Nick.
All right.
Thank you, buddy.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
I'll call.
Okay. I didn't accident, but I hung up.
Seaback donated and said, shout out to the Bears, Jesse.
Shout out to the Bay Area. T is out of Alabama. T, welcome to the show.
Yeah, what's up, Jesse?
All is well, T. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Just sitting there listening to your melody as usual, Jesse.
We can imagine what T
Yeah.
gonna say, huh? We should put money on it. Didn't you already know what T gonna say, right?
I already knew.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
knew.
yeah, because you always know what you're going to
What
say.
have I said, T, that you
It's
disagree
really
with?
amazing, man, how folks sit there and listen to this stupidity that you sit here and preach every single day. Man.
What do I say that's not true, T?
Just everything you say.
Like what, T?
Everything.
You call about the same thing. Something wrong with you?
Your thoughts are not you.
Wait, one at a
all
time.
that
Are you
bull
saying
crap,
that you are your thoughts?
Yes, I think. Just like I'm thinking you an idiot.
So,
Okay.
so
That's
Satan
how
is your
I'm
daddy. That's why you
I'm
think.
sitting there like, you know,
Hey, D,
you're an idiot,
C,
man. I mean,
D, C.
just educate
T.
yourself, man.
Goodbye, T. Oh, God. And T on drugs. And his phone is always messing up. I believe it's an Obama phone. Earl, let me move faster. Earl is out of Michigan. Earl, thank you for calling. Thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Yes, Jesse.
Oh, here's
I
another
think we
one.
got crossed up last week on your Bible question. Was Jesus a beta male?
Alpha.
It was Alpha.
Yes.
But you know, if you had been there, you would have said stone the harlot and let her curl up and die.
First of all, why do you say that? Why you falsely accuse me? Satan.
Because
Thank you, buddy. I'll be back in a moment, folks. You don't know, that man don't know what you're talking about. He black. Cortez. No, I did her, right?
Yeah,
I
you
mean, I
did her.
didn't do her, but I read her song like. Earl, out of Michigan. Earl, get it off your chest.
before I start, I like the point with Joel. When he started cracking on folks, he opens himself up, supposed to crack on them. You might say, open up a dance studio might be a beta move. So what are you going to do? Borrow one of his dancer's outfit, a tutu and a slippers, prance around the stage doing pirouettes?
How
What are you
old
going to
are
do
you?
next? Open up a nail salon?
Are you and T sisters? Or are you and T
Yeah, that's what you said
lesbians?
before
Which
I
one?
cracked. That's why, nigga, do you cross-dress it when you're dancing?
Answer my question first,
Are
and
you
then I answer your
cross-dressing?
question.
Do you dancing here? You need to put the pom-poms down.
Are you and T sisters or
You made a
lesbians?
little
Which
wide
one?
crack.
I don't need someone to tell me that a man took off his body parts and put on a woman's body parts and a dress. I don't need someone to tell me that that's a woman. It's not a woman. Beta, savage. Savage. Beta. So the wall going up. So the wall going up. Where's the ice cream? Are we able to eat the ice cream? Don't let anyone tell you that anger is normal. It is not. All people who has anger are in a fallen state. And as a result, they have fear, doubt, jealousy, worry, insecurity, envy, and strife, and no love at all. That's why they destroy themselves, their children, their relationships, the grass, the paint on the house, everything. Just FYI. Check out the Hate Report Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. It's amazing.
Yep.
Pacific time.
Hello, children. All right, announcement. Cappy is going to take about 2 weeks off from Asshole Consulting. So if you have paid or you put your request in, I will get to that. Which means you Hanyakers out there that when I do a couple more videos after announcing this video, ha, I knew he couldn't stay away, ha, ha, ha. Clearly mean going up.
Oh, everybody's playing attackers, bro. Attackers. I'm just gonna play Green.
Welcome to the Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Trey Lockerbie, and today we have Jamie Catherwood on the show. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
You have one of the best blogs, I feel like, on the internet, Investor Amnesia. You have these Sunday reads that are so entertaining. I've been following for a long time. I really love them, and I've been really excited to have you on the show. But for those who don't know you personally yet, I'd be surprised to know how young you are. You're 26, but you already have this amazing career and this amazing career of literature you've written. And you've achieved a lot for being very young, including becoming an associate at OSAM, O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. Talk to us about how you got introduced to OSAM. You've been there for a few years now.
Well, first of all, I love this podcast already. It's nice. Thank you for all the compliments right off the bat. And yeah, so in terms of joining O'Shaughnessy, I So going back a little bit, I was a history major in college, which will be very relevant to this conversation. My dad's philosophy was if you kind of want to do business and you know you're going to want to do business as a career, then you're probably going to get an MBA. And so his thinking was there's not really a point in doing business undergrad because you're just going to do business twice, undergrad and MBA. And so, right or wrong, I took that advice and did what I was passionate about, which was history. And I went to school in London. My dad's also British, at King's College London, and did history. And the way British degrees work is you just do your major for 3 years for your bachelor. So I only took history classes for 3 years. And then along the way, I got interested in investing, but because I was only taking history classes, there wasn't really a way outside of the few economic history courses they offered to kind of learn through school about investing. And so I had a friend recommend to me that I listen to Invest Like the Best, which is Patrick O'Shaughnessy's podcast, and Masters in Business by Barry Ritholtz. And so I started listening to those podcasts and just kind of wrote down every term that I didn't understand and looked it up later. In the beginning, it was basically every other word. And then when I graduated, I ended up getting a job in finance and investing, working for an institutional investment consultant in DC. And I just cold emailed Patrick one day, figured out what the kind of email format was for OSAM, and sent him this email saying, you know, you don't know me, but I kind of credit your podcast with helping me learn enough to get a first job in finance. And so if you're up for it, I'd love to kind of take you out to lunch or dinner just to say thank you. And yeah, just because you've given so much to me and I'd just love to repay it. And he responded back pretty quickly saying that he would love to get lunch. And so he didn't apparently at the time realize that I was in DC and O'Shaughnessy is based in Stamford, Connecticut. And so we set a date. And then when the day came, I just got up at like 4 a.m. and drove to Stamford, Connecticut to get lunch. And actually, ironically, I figured I'd already got one of the two podcast hosts that I've been listening to and helping me get a job. And so I DM'd Barry Ritholtz on Twitter and ended up actually getting breakfast with him in New York. And then he made sure I figured out the Metro North train to get to Stamford to get lunch with Patrick. But stayed in touch with Patrick, and eventually through Twitter, I got to know Jim O'Shaughnessy, and anyone who's on Twitter and FinTwit knows how prolific a user Jim is on Twitter and how great he is with mentoring individuals.
Yeah, the best meme dealer out there.
I missed it.
Exactly. And so I got to know Jim, and then we just kind of stayed in touch. And then, I don't know, maybe 2 years into my first job, Jim gave me a call and kind of said, you know, Patrick and I have decided that you need to come work for us. And so put in my 2 weeks the next morning, and kind of 3 years later, here we are.
Super interesting. We love Jim. We love Patrick. They've been on the show. Love what they're doing over there with their show as well. And Jim's actually coming back on the show here pretty soon, so that'll be fun. You know, studying history is one thing. Studying financial markets and the history there is a whole nother thing. So what exactly piqued your interest early on to go the financial route as part of your history degree?
So, I mean, as I mentioned, I took some economic history courses in college. To be honest, I found them really boring, ironically. It was more along the lines of, you know, how did a new farming technique in 18th century Britain improve GDP growth? Like, that is really just snooze fest. But when I graduated, I got into finance, and then the same friend who recommended that I listen to those podcasts also recommended I get into FinTwit because I was really big on networking. I'm still big on kind of cold outreach and just trying to talk with people. And so I was trying to do that on LinkedIn, and he said, no, do this on Twitter. And so I got into Twitter, followed everyone he was following, which is the kind of just main finance Twitter accounts. And I saw that there were a lot of people putting out really interesting content, blogs, podcasts, etc. And I kind of missed writing because as a history major, that's basically all you do for your degree is reading and writing. And so I thought, you know, maybe there was a way that I could merge these two interests of mine, finance and history, and maybe some people would be interested in articles on that. And so, yeah, I just kind of started writing a few articles on Medium, and to my surprise, they were very well received and people were interested. It was just total kind of luck that there wasn't a person, at least in the financial Twitter sphere, kind of solely focusing on financial history. And so it's just pure serendipity that my kind of two main passions were an area where I didn't have to compete with someone that could be writing better than I was. So it kind of just took off from there. And the more I've researched it, the more fascinating I find it, because there are so many innovations today that we think are novel and are new, but there were previous iterations stretching back centuries. And all of it is really just stories in human nature, because so much of finance has changed. We're not investing, logistically and operationally the same way as we were in the 17th century, but the people actually trading different assets are executing in the same way, kind of psychologically. We're making the same mistakes as the people that were trading 400 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we're saying history, we're not talking about the Fed being established in 1913. We're talking about the 1600s a lot, oftentimes on your blog, which is just super interesting. And you found somewhat of an expertise writing about bubbles, mania, and even fraud. And when people think of bubbles, I often hear them referring to it as something like tulip mania, right? You hear it all the time. And when I was reading your research, it appears something that stood out. It's very surprising to me, but tulip mania might actually be a misnomer. So talk to us about how tulip mania has become this shorthand and how maybe it never even occurred.
Yeah, so this is kind of one of the bugbears I have, and it all stemmed from Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal, who's become a good friend because he's an equally passionate financial historian, and he recommended that I read this book called Tulip Mania by Anne Goldgar, which only after it arrived from Amazon, I realized she was actually a history lecturer at King's, and that I must have had at least one or two lectures by her my first year. So that was funny. But her book is an amazing account of the so-called tulip mania. And what she shows is, there's no questioning that people were buying and selling tulips, and there were probably some ridiculous prices paid for them. But there's kind of three issues. So the first issue is that mainly people today get their idea of tulip mania from Charles Mackay's Extraordinary Delusions and Madness of Crowds, or whatever the title is. And the problem with his research was that it was based on largely the work of a German writer in the 18th century. And that German writer had gotten most of his kind of source material from these pamphlets and circulars that were kind of floating around at the time of the Dutch tulip mania. And they were all satirical. And so what was happening is that the kind of elite class in Holland was unhappy that this new kind of class of merchants that were getting involved in the tulip trade were making money and kind of elevating their own status within society into the kind of upper echelons, because they now had this money, and the wealthy people thought they weren't deserving of being in this elite class because they were kind of new money and etc. And so they started kind of putting out these pamphlets talking about the things you hear today when people talk about tulip mania, that people were getting drunk at taverns while their wife and children starved at home, and they were losing all their money kind of betting on the prices of tulips, and that people were paying as much as the price of houses for a single tulip bulb. People, were committing suicide because they went bankrupt from losing all their money in the tulip crash. And this was all just exaggerated kind of stories and propaganda designed to convince people broadly in society that this was a bad thing that should be stamped out. And it was really just because these wealthy elites did not like the fact that people were kind of entering their realm of society. And so this German author in the 17th century, though, took all these pamphlets and took them as fact and wrote about them and just took every story as if it actually happened. And then Charles Mackay came along, used his work as the basis for his sections on tulip mania, and now everyone just kind of assumes that this is all true accounts. And what Anne Goldgar's book found, because there's all these stories of one tulip bulb being traded like 300 times, etc. And Anne Golgar spent years in the archives, like tracing the transactions, and she said the longest chain that she could find was like 5. And the other thing is the way that these tulips were traded is basically in the fall. Someone who actually knows about gardening will tell me I'm wrong about this, but say it's fall is when you plant the tulip bulbs, and then the winter they're just underground. The spring is when they would, come up and bloom, and then that's when the person that purchased the tulip would actually get the tulip. But what would usually happen is that they were kind of like futures contracts, and so they would make the agreement to purchase in the fall, bulk go underground, and then in the spring that's when they would actually pay for it. And so some of these absurdly high prices that people talk about, like the price of houses, etc., no one actually ever ended up paying that price in many situations. It was just kind of the agreed upon price, but then a lot of these transactions didn't actually end up happening because by the time spring rolled around, the people that agreed to pay that much just kind of were making themselves invisible. They didn't want to pay it, etc. And so it's just one of those things that's very interesting from a kind of human nature standpoint, how a narrative can just take hold even though it's just not true. And so it's become the kind of go-to reference for anytime someone thinks speculative kind of fervor is ridiculous or in something that they deem stupid, then it's just exactly like tulip mania, and that's it. And like it's just become the kind of shorthand for this is dumb and it shouldn't be going up. And so it's just like tulip mania, whether it be Bitcoin during the dot-com bubble, like same thing. And so just interesting how it continues to persist when it's not actually based on fact.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, like, say if someone dug up some propaganda of marketing from a magazine from like the 60s showing how doctors are recommending cigarettes, and then all we had to go on was, hey, cigarettes must be great for you.
Yeah.
The due diligence from there.
Yeah, or like people use ramp capital and like liquidity on Twitter today, and their memes as like, oh wow, this all stuff actually happened. Like, no, it's just a meme. Like, right.
So let's talk about what are some of the signs of a bubble forming, and then I'd love to talk about the signs of a bubble about to burst.
So I think one of the best frameworks for understanding kind of how bubbles form and why is the bubble triangle, which is a framework that my friends at Queen's University Belfast, John Turner and William Quinn, wrote about in their great book, Boom and Bust. And the bubble triangle is basically a financial recreation of the fire triangle, which is heat, oxygen, fuel, and then you need the spark to kind of ignite the fire. But with the fire triangle, you have to have all 3 sides, available to sustain a fire. And if one of them is taken away, then the fire goes out because it can't survive without all 3 sides. And so they took that kind of approach and applied it to the formation of bubbles. And they replaced the sides with speculation, marketability, and money/credit. So that framework for heat, the heat is speculation, and so that kind of doesn't even need to be explained, but obviously it's just people wanting to get in and make money on an asset that they see others making money in, and prices just keep rising, and so more people get involved because they think that there's an opportunity to make money quickly and easily. And then the oxygen for a bubble triangle is marketability, and that does not mean the kind of traditional definition of marketing, but rather the ability to easily buy and sell shares. And so if it's easier to buy and sell an asset, then it's going to be easier for more people to get involved and kind of keep the momentum and excitement going. And so you need that because you can't really get national hype and widespread speculation if it's really hard to actually buy the asset. And then lastly, you have the money and credit side of the triangle, which is the fuel. So as we all know, especially today, when there's low yields and cheap money and just money printer constantly burring, there is a lot of kind of speculative bubbles around the market, whether it's one large one or kind of a bunch of pockets of mini bubbles that can be sustained because yields are low and it's easier to finance companies, and it's also kind of pushing investors further out on the risk spectrum because they have to kind of stay in riskier assets when yields are so low. And then the kind of initial spark that sets off the overall fire once these three sides are there is usually throughout history a technology and some type of innovation or government policy. And so in recent history, I feel like it's leaned more towards the technology side of the spark, but also in the 2008 crisis, you could talk about the kind of government's initiative to make sure that everybody could buy a home, et cetera, and pushing the housing industry. And this framework, though, I think is really useful, and it kind of demonstrates how history can actually be applied to modern markets, because it's an actionable framework where obviously not every single bubble will fit this triangle, but it's a good way for thinking about whether a bubble is forming and why a bubble is forming.
I'm kind of curious how you look at mania bubbles together. For example, like right now, everyone's saying we're in a bubble, we're in the everything bubble, even Jeremy Grantham saying we're in a super bubble. And maybe it's just hard when you're in it and you're myopic that you don't see the mania around you until everything's crashed and you have hindsight. But are you seeing mania in today's markets? And if so, like describe that and maybe how it compares to previous manias we've seen.
So I definitely think that there, especially over the last 2 years, there's been no shortage of pockets of mania. I think what's interesting about today versus history is that there tend to be more mini manias today in areas of like kind of diverse areas of the market, instead of one massive mania kind of dominating the whole market, which tends to be more the case in history. And I mean, just going back through the last 2 years, I don't want to even get into kind of like crypto NFT, but JPEGs of rocks, but which I do think there are merits to both of the categories I just mentioned. But I think that for me, one of the interesting examples has been with SPACs and kind of these EV companies that went public, because so many of them had literally no product or no sales and were just kind of going off hype of orders and still investors were enthusiastically buying up the shares, and it just makes no sense. I mean, Nikola's prime example, in their first quarterly report hit $36,000 in revenue, and that was from installing solar panels on Trevor Milton's ranch. And so, but still, the price soared like 80% in the first month of trading. We all know how that played out, but I think that that is an example of mania somewhat recently, and also ties into this kind of idea that I've written about before of the 3 I's, which I don't know if you want to go into now or later, but
let's go into it now. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, so the 3 I's is kind of this Warren Buffett quote from 2008, where in an interview with Charlie Rose, he's talking about how in most instances of speculative manias, there's this progression from the innovator who kind of has the original idea or applies or creates a new technology. And then there's the imitator companies, which are not necessarily bad companies, but they're just not the first mover. And so you have like the Lyft to an Uber. And then the third phase is when you have the idiots, which is not applying that term to investors, but to the kind of more fraudulent and shady people starting companies to kind of just take advantage of the hype cycle around whatever the exciting innovation is. And so you see this play out many times over history. What I found interesting is that with this 3 I's quote, there's actually basically an identical version of this idea in an 1866 issue of The Economist, where an article stated that there were 3 stages to a speculation. First, the clever man, the original man, finds a good thing out. Then the whole trade sees he is right and joins, and at last comes the gentleman from the West End, and upon which we know it is all over. So not the 3 I's, but the exact same concept, where there's kind of these 3 stages, and there's the original guy, everyone catches on and applies the new idea, and then someone comes and ruins it for everybody by taking things too far. And with the Nikola example, I think that it was fascinating because it played out so quickly. Usually there's more of a kind of lag between these 3 phases, but when Nikola first went public through the SPAC, I think in
I
like,
killed
May or
him.
June 2020,
I killed
it was
him,
from
dude.
a
The
time when
damage.
Tesla's shares
The
had just
fucking
been on,
damage,
like,
bro. I
a
killed him.
wild ride. They were up hundreds of percent. I don't remember already, like year to date. And it was one of the popular stocks as the kind of day trading Robin Hood. Everybody stuck at home crowd started getting involved, and this was a household name, Tesla, so that was a popular stock. And people that had missed out on that Tesla opportunity and saw so many people, especially with the way TikToks were going around on social media, so many people were posting their gains made in Tesla. Then when Nikola came about and they were going public, then it was kind of this opportunity to get the next Tesla. Which in this case was ironic because one company is Tesla and the other is Nikola, named same founder, going back to the 1800s. But and so even though Nikola had no actual working product yet that they were selling, then it didn't matter to investors because they just wanted to get in on the exciting kind of space of electric vehicles and be early on the next Tesla, so they didn't miss out again. And so,
dude,
despite the evidence, the stock price went up and people got over enthusiastic.
I got
and
5 kills.
It kind of all went downhill from there for Trevor Milton and Nikola.
I know.
So that was interesting because Nikola was simultaneously the imitator and the idiot in that cycle. But that was just a clear kind of progression to me of that 3 eyes cycle, and it was really interesting to watch in real time.
$20K.
Yeah, and Rivian was valued, I think, around $100 billion before making a single sale. So I definitely agree your point there. You know, Buffett,
I got so many kills.
Buffett, he definitely read that 1866 Economist article, which, you know, I didn't even know The Economist has been around that long, which is just also incredible. You know, Buffett has another quote similar to this on this topic around the proliferation of new technology. He has a quote around when the automobile first came into existence and the mania that ensued around that, and how I think at that time there was around 300 auto manufacturers that came to the market. And he has this quote, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something to the effect of, you would have been much better off shorting horses rather than trying to pick a winner out of that factor. And so I love this idea of tech being the spark. Talk to us about the tech bubble of the 90s, and I don't mean the 1990s, I mean the 1690s, where we had tech bubbles and bicycles and all kinds of things.
Yeah, and just to go back to your Buffett quote, what's fascinating about that era is that electric vehicles were actually the dominant form of transportation when the automobiles came about in the late 1800s. And I think it was until 1912 that electric vehicles outnumbered internal combustion traditional gasoline-powered automobiles. And Henry Ford's wife actually drove an electric car, a Baker Electric. There's a great video of Jay Leno on Jay Leno's garage driving around this 1909 Baker Electric. And so just fascinating that people think, again, electric vehicles are a new innovation, and it was actually the original. So it's kind of just a century-long comeback story. And
they only go, 2 miles at the time or something?
No, that's the fascinating thing. No, yeah, some of them had longer ranges than cars today. I have an article up here. There were charging stations all over, and yeah, some of them could go, I don't know, I want to say like 186 miles or something. Yeah, a 1909 Baker Electric, the one that Jay Leno drove, could go up to 100 miles on a single charge.
If I use Gnesis, I need X
pretty
speed.
Impressive. But yeah, so the 90s tech bubble in the 1690s is one of my all-time favorite bubbles, and that's because it was kind of sparked, I guess partially sparked by technology, but initially sparked by a treasure hunt. And so what happened was in the 1680s, in the late 1680s, there was this sea captain named William Phipps, and he was always around the sea docks in London. And he kept hearing rumors of this sunken treasure ship somewhere near South or Central America. And he heard that the ship had apparently been kind of transporting back all the riches from the Spanish Empire's colonies to Spain. And that somewhere along the route, I guess they had been too greedy and packed too much treasure, and so they actually sunk to the ocean floor. And so allegedly there was all this treasure just kind of sitting around. And eventually, after hearing this rumor for so long, Phipps decided, I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna go see if this treasure's actually there. And so obviously it's expensive to fund this whole kind of journey yourself, because you need crew, supplies, a ship, etc. for months, and so that's expensive. And so he went to London to find kind of a group or a single investor to stake his journey and get a percentage of the profits. And so he finds this Duke, the Duke of Albemarle, and the Duke and this small kind of group of investors form a joint stock company specifically designed to fund this this expedition. And much like modern venture capital, the group of investors would receive a payout based on whether he found the treasure or not. What's also interesting is that shareholders at this time were frequently referred to as adventurers. And so I just let, like, venture capital, this is a very similar type of investment to how modern VC works, and it was literally at that time investors were referred to as adventurers. And a treasure hunt is the definition of an adventure. And so sure enough, Phipps goes off on this voyage and he finds the treasure, he finds the ship, and there were actually 32 tons of treasure on the ship, which is just, I mean, can't even really comprehend the size of that. It's too large a number. And it takes, I want to say they spend like 2 full months hauling up treasure from the ocean floor, and they still couldn't transport all of it back. And he comes back to London, and that small group of investors, the Duke and his colleagues made 5,000% returns, I believe, or 10,000% returns on their investment. And it didn't take long for kind of word to spread of this just gargantuan return that these investors made and all the riches that they had achieved. And so there was a explosion in diving engine technology companies, where, going back to this 3 eyes concept, William Phipps was obviously the innovator. He's the first person to achieve this success, and then everyone else
I meant to go
wants to fund an equally successful treasure hunter or come up with a way to find sunken treasure themselves. And so you started to see this proliferation of diving engine technology companies, which were just these bizarre apparatuses that were designed to allow a treasure hunter to breathe underwater longer, with the very simple thesis just being, if you can breathe underwater longer, you can search for treasure longer, and you can increase your probabilities of finding treasure as a result. And so you had all these companies called things like the John Williams Diving Engine Technology Company. And I think there was some stat that in the 17 years before Phipps's treasure hunt, there were like 2 patents related to diving engines. And then in the 2 years after his treasure hunt, there were 17 patents filed in relation to diving engine technology companies. And as you can imagine, none of these companies ever found any treasure, and it was a whole kind of just bust. But there was this widespread excitement around diving engine technology and the capabilities, and also in general, because of the joint stock kind of investment vehicle that these investors staking Phipps's journey had used, there was a excitement just for joint stock companies in general. And so there were a bunch of listings in non-diving engine technology related companies. But so there's kind of this widespread stock market bubble with a ton of IPOs. In 1697,
I wish I could do anything.
70% of the companies that have been trading in 1694 were wiped out. So basically, of all the companies that were being bought and sold by investors in 1694, within 3 years, 70% of them were wiped out of existence. And so that kind of just shows you the nature of the boom bust there. But yeah, fascinating period, and a really interesting and fun example of a 90s tech bubble outside of the 1990s.
And I read on your website too that there were something like 670 bicycle companies that entered the market when the first bicycle companies arrived. Like, talk to us about that. That's also one of my favorite bubbles that you've written about. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so that was in the 1890s, and I'm trying to think. I mean, there was a bubble in the U.S. Actually, our first panic in 1792. Not technology related, but seems to be a trend of tech bubbles in the 90s of the century. And so yeah, the bicycle mania was in the 1890s, and all of what I'm about to say again comes from those two Queen's University Belfast academics, and everyone should read their book. It's the great account of this bubble. But essentially what happened was in the 1890s there were a series of kind of manufacturing innovations where, I don't remember all of them, but they're related to like ball bearings and kind of welding and the materials used to create bikes. And the bicycle went from the penny farthing, which people might not immediately know what I'm talking about, but you've probably seen those old pictures or old illustrations of the tires where it's like a massive, bigger than you front tire and then like the tiny little tire at the back, and they just look absolutely ridiculous. And during the 1890s, these series of kind of innovations led to the creation of the bicycle as we know it today. They look exactly the same. They kind of have that pneumatic tire and the diamond-shaped frame, which made for a more easy and comfortable ride because you weren't like 15 feet off the ground. And there was just widespread excitement for this new kind of easier mode of transportation, and the British public was just enamored by bicycles. Interestingly, it also had really significant impacts on women's rights because it kind of modernized how women were viewed in society, particularly in the way that they were expected to dress, because with these bicycles you couldn't wear these kind of like frilly, large dresses that they were kind of expected to wear previously, because they would just get caught in the spokes and crash. And so women started to kind of wear more pants, etc. So it's just kind of an interesting side story.
Oh
about
God, I died! No,
revolutionized
I should have
rights
ulted
in the 1890s in Britain. But
that was
yeah,
crazy.
So once there was this
I didn't
excitement
use
for
my potion
bicycle companies,
or my ult.
again, a wave of entrepreneurs
it
recognized
was
this national excitement and started forming bicycle companies. And so in 2.5 years, 671 bicycle companies were formed and traded on the exchange. And it's just, I mean, I feel like there were too many to remember EV SPACs and IPOs in the last 2 years, but the thought of 670 of any type of industry going public in 2 years is just remarkable.
And how many of those 670 are around today?
Yeah, exactly. What's also interesting is that some of those bicycle companies were actually the same ones that pivoted into electric vehicles a few years later. There's one in particular, I can't remember, but they were just riding transportation mania to transportation mania.
That's so fascinating. One of the other bubbles or medias that stood out to me also, maybe it's because I work in beverage and I just really love this story, was the Guinness beer IPO of also in the 1800s. So things were getting pretty wonky in the 1800s, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the magnitude of this mania.
Yeah, so this transpired during a kind of, it actually was the kind of spark for a broader brewery mania in the 1880s and bled over into the 1890s. And yeah, essentially Guinness decided in, I think, 1886 to list their shares. And when they did so, Guinness was still the kind of dominant brand, just as it is today. It's recognized everywhere, and especially at that time, there was still this belief that there were some like medicinal benefits to drinking it, and so just everybody knew it as the main brand. And so when the company said that they were going to list their shares, everybody wanted to get in on the action. And what was interesting is you have to remember at